But with me this morning to help start the show, we have our host, but he's also a really important member of the content of this discussion, but Ian Jefferies, President and CEO of the Association of American Railroads. Let's welcome Ian. Thank you so much. All right. I'm going to be in this chair. You know, I'm longer and bigger, so it just...
Can I lay down? Or?
No, yeah. You know, I did do this with Richard Branson once. He was on the stage with me, and I said, Richard, you know, welcome to my first class. And he kicked off his shoes, and he laid down on the couch, and a Gannett photographer caught his shoe in the air. And it was just like an iconic photo. So you're welcome to do the same.
Okay, we'll give it a shot.
Yeah. But Ian, let me just start out and ask you just point blank, you know, and kind of look at the world that you're in. And I want to congratulate you because I think you're in your 8th year now as president of the Association of American Railroads. And as you kind of look at your membership, I'm interested, you know, when you think about 8 years ago, and people have a hard time doing this because they think all the technology we have today, we've had all that time. But when you look at real advances in automation, real advances in what AI is, you know, the generative AI is doing to us, when you look at, you know, systems, complex systems, data coming on board, how has the world changed from when you came on board as president of AAR to this moment?
That's a great question. Matter of fact, I was listening to CNBC as I was driving over here this morning, and someone was making the point that in 1999, social media didn't exist, and it is now a $3 trillion industry. And really talking about that in the sense of AI, and that 10 years from now, there are going to be companies with market caps we can't believe that we haven't even contemplated today. And so when I think back to when I took the helm at the AAR, you know, this was pre-pandemic. I think the first time you and I talked was in 2020, kind of during peak pandemic times.
Right.
And so what I've seen, at least event-wise, so 2020 we had a pandemic.
Well, let me just stop you there. When we talked, when I was at the Hill, I was editor-at-large of the Hill, we had that conversation. And we did these really great remote conversations during that period of time. This country had a heart attack over, you know, moving things, and, you know,
Right.
rail surged. I mean, I just want to be honest, for a lot of people, rail was not at the forefront of what they thought about America's transportation infrastructure. That changed, rail and trucking.
100%.
Yeah.
And that part of the reason is, so that's for the good. We continued to move things 24/7 throughout the pandemic when a lot of industries and businesses were shut down, but communities and individuals needed critical goods that we supply, and we kept things moving, thanks to our employees, thanks to our companies. But then that rolled into what were kind of nationally recognized supply chain challenges. And so we had to navigate that front when volumes snapped back at us. And so it really opened, I think, the nation's eyes to the criticality of what we do, but also put a spotlight on us that requires us to operate at a level that, you know, cannot be, we can't let up. We can't have hiccups. And so we've got to apply lessons learned. And we are a legacy industry. Matter of fact, next year when America celebrates its 250th anniversary, the rail industry is going to celebrate its 200th anniversary.
I know we've all been watching The Gilded Age and George Russell,
okay.
And, you know,
But-
has that been good for your industry, George Russell?
I
or
don't
is
know
it,
that it's had much of an impact either way. But for us, though, that means we have been kind of under a regulatory regime that's been developed literally over hundreds of years. And we're today operating with regulations that have been around since the steam engine era, operations that were written in 1970. And as you just reflected on, you know, the industry has continued to innovate and evolve. We're steel on steel. We're always going to be steel on steel. But everything around it and how we do things, technology has continued to evolve. And what we have seen, and we're by no means the only industry that faces this, is that the regulatory and legislative process is a really hard time keeping up with the pace of innovation in the industry.
So can you describe for people, you know, when you just said steel on steel, so I hadn't really thought about that framing. And I also know that in your membership, you're not only moving cargo, which is an enormous part of this, you move people, you've got all the, you know, the different dimensions of this rail. I mean, I guess, you know, if you were to paint the system you have, if you were to push reset, you know, sometimes we talk about, you know, the best way to know a system is zero-based budgeting and kind of start out. How would you reinvent our system today in terms of what transportation system would you like to see and have versus where we're at now? That helps us understand the regulatory obligations, if you will.
So I think so much of how we're governed by the rules and regulations that we have to operate by are kind of fixed inputs. And what I would really like to see is a system that allows for outcomes. In other words, this industry, as I mentioned, so 50 years ago, we may have done a lot of things with manual mechanics, manual inspections. Well, technology has taken over a lot of those roles, or at least can play a part in a lot of those roles. And so our big push is let's have a regulatory structure that focuses on outcomes. So tell me where you want us to go, and let us figure out the best way to get there, and also let us continue to evolve how we're getting there. But as long as we're achieving or exceeding the desired regulatory result, then that should be the goal. And let's do that by data. Let's do that by objective analytics. And so if we were to reset the industry today, so much of it would be based on the rules and regulations that we're governed by, and a flexibility therein that allows us to continue to evolve, so that there's an incentive to continue to invest in safety advancing, efficiency advancing, capacity advancing tactics.
What's your North Star, Ian, when it comes to workforce and thinking about modernization, technology coming on, and how you look at workforce where they're at, workforce where they need to be, looking at upskilling? How do you sew that together? So much of your industry is unionized.
Right.
How do you web that together so it's not, it feels less like a zero-sum challenge and more of a together challenge?
And it should not be a zero-sum challenge. And so when you look at our workforce, we have what is operating in an inherently risky industry, right? It is big, heavy machinery, and our safety record is second to none when it comes to peer industries. And that's a reflection on the commitment to safety that our employees have, the strong safety culture, and the value of the roles they bring to the workplace. As time goes by, those roles need the ability to evolve, because we've seen from the new generation of employees, they don't necessarily have a desire to have the same roles that maybe their parents or grandparents did. This is an outdoor sport. It's a very heavy industry. It's a very challenging industry. And if there are tools we can provide to provide a better work experience, a less rigorous, physically demanding work experience, or a better work-life balance, we need to be working closely with our employees and our unions to evolve that. And some of that will require changing roles. And so I mentioned the role technology can play, for example, in the inspection regime. So much is done manually now. We have technology that can do such a more advanced job in different types of inspections. And that means that our employees are letting the technology does what it does best, where it does best. There are certain things humans just inherently do better. Focus on that, and also focus on fixing areas technology identifies that need to be addressed.
Are your best friends railway folks? Is that who you hang out with?
I mean, we are known to run in a pack in DC.
Do you ever hang out with the highway folks, or the, I don't know, airplane folks, the boat folks? I mean, other I mean, I'm just interested if you kind of get out of your zone and meet other people in the transportation world.
So I will say one thing I've really focused on in my role as CEO of the AAR is working in tandem and in concert with a lot of the other modes. And so historically, people think rails and trucks hate each other and we fight. And maybe historically in DC we did.
You get along, so we can say that you get along with trucks?
100%.
Okay.
I love trucks.
That may be the most tweetable
together.
moment yet,
So,
but so when you look broadly at transportation, I'm interested in how the sector, I mean, to the degree that you can speak to how this crowd looks at the sector, and you look at innovation. I'm looking at Rob Atkinson right now, and until Rob's going to be up here. Rob, I've known for years and years and years. He's been the biggest advocate for embrace of technology and kind of moving this faster and quicker. How does your industry look at? Are they kicking and screaming through? I was going to ask Rob, when did we become so tech sketchy, tech skeptical to some degree in some ways? And I'm interested in how your industry looks at tech and whether they think you need to have a kind of reset and overhaul on the regulatory side.
So to answer your last question first, yes, we need a reset and an overhaul, but that's a big enchilada. And we have, given that we're such a safety sensitive industry, there's an inherent cautiousness to adopting new ways of doing things versus the old way, because the old way works pretty darn good. But if the data determines there's a better way to do things, we should 100% go down that road. And so for us, there needs to be a real strong proving ground, pilot programs, et cetera, that allow you to try out new ways, build data sets. If the data demonstrates objectively that the new way is a better way, there should be a predictable, certainty-filled way that allows you to dovetail that into meeting your regulatory requirement. And the regulatory process is meant to be slow and arduous and and frustrating, frankly. And that can be good when you're trying to stop something, frankly, but it can be a real challenge when you're trying to move the ball forward.
So, we didn't coordinate on this stuff at all, but I just, the thought occurs to me that in this country, we've seen rail disasters in our history, some pretty tough ones. Mm-hmm. Would technology have mitigated some of these? Would modernization, would investment, would infrastructure investment have mitigated some of the worst nightmares we've seen in some rail disasters?
So when you look at the safety record of this industry, there's been dramatic safety improvements, especially over the last several decades, across the board with all types of incidents. And a lot of that's due to partial economic deregulation that occurred about 4 decades ago. That's resulted in the ability for railroads to invest their own capital. We invest about $25 billion of our own capital every year back into our network. And so a well-maintained railroad is a safe railroad inherently. But overlaying technology that can continuously monitor the various aspects of the railroads, that can overtake if, for example, positive train control, if a rule's broken by a train, it'll shut the train down, stop it. That overlaying with our highly skilled and highly trained and highly committed workforce, like that's the magic combination that's going to allow us to continue to reach new highs and levels of safety,
so
which
we
are
totally
hitting.
Unfair questions now, and you're going to.
Oh, great. Okay, here we go.
Have you been to Tokyo lately?
I've
or
not.
Shanghai?
No.
So I have been to Tokyo lately. I've been to Seoul.
Is that an invitation?
No, you're welcome to go with me. We can go on like a transportation kind of global trip. I've been to Shanghai. Their trains are so smooth. You can do cell phone calls in the worst hills. In Seoul is a really hilly place, and you're kind of going through everything. And I can't believe how clear my and so you get a sense that there's just something remarkably different about the infrastructure, the investment, the technology in some of these places. I was on the Amtrak, if Amtrak's in the room. I was on the whatever the high end Acela, the new Acela, broke down 10 times on one trip the other night, $500 ticket. I'd said, I'm getting off. I got off in Wilmington and got a car. So in this space, is it wrong to look at Seoul and Japan and Shanghai and other transportation systems that just seem to be at a different tech level as a goal for this country?
So I think it's important to put that into context. So one, let's break it up between passenger and freight. So hands down, the U.S. has the most advanced, admirable freight rail system in the world. We're the envy of the world when it comes to moving freight.
We're kicking their tail on those fronts. Okay.
On the passenger side, you're right. We are way behind. But why is that? It is because in some of these countries you point out, the public has made a decision to put hundreds of billions of dollars of investment into passenger rail. If you look at the entire funding that, for example, Amtrak's gotten over the 50-ish years it's been around, it pales to maybe 1 year of highway funding. And so our society is focused on investing into highways, things along those lines. Other countries, other societies have focused on investing into passenger rail. And until you see that level of public commitment in the U.S., it's going to be really hard to make those advances.
I would tell our friends at Amtrak, I would love to publish that op-ed because I didn't know that. I mean, I think it's one of those things that people don't understand how the spending investment across different platforms, comes in. But, our interface with a major transportation mode, particularly Northeast Corridor, is one of these ones that is part of this story that we need to figure out as we're thinking about looking at how you invest in the system. Passenger side of it, but walk us through a little bit, Ian, in a more tangible way. Tell us some stories of what might be improved vis-a-vis technology and evolving to absorb that into the system. What could we do better?
Sure. I will say that there's dramatic investment occurring on the NEC, so I think that traveling experience is going to continue to get better as years go by.
I'm so excited about that.
There we go. Yeah. So technologically wise, so much of what we're talking about comes down to inspection regimes. And so whether it's track inspection, whether it's locomotive inspection, whether it's signal inspection. So that was all built at a time when doing things manually, walking out, looking at it with the human eye was the best way to do it. In certain circumstances, that is still the best way to do it. However, for example, looking at signal inspection, so signals at crossings, gates go up and down, let you know. So there are specific time intervals where those have to be inspected. However, many of these signal systems are now remotely monitored 24/7. And so the health of that system at all times. And so requiring manual intervals for coming out and looking at it doesn't make a lot of sense to us. Another one, track inspection. Again, certain frequencies required for individuals to walk the track and inspect it with the naked eye. Well, we have technology that you can affix to a train and revenue service that can do continuous monitoring and inspection of the track while you're operating the train. So that's twofold advantage. One, you're not taking that segment of track out of revenue service. You're not shutting it down. And two, you're not putting employees out on the track in a risky situation. Slips, trips, falls, et cetera, are the number one cause of injury for our employees. So if you can take them out of that and have technology helping you inspect and then pinpointing where there might be issues, then the employee comes back in, inspects it, makes a repair as needed. As I mentioned, there are areas where the manual inspection is going to be more effective than technology. It's that right combination.
How much of a nightmare was Sebastian Junger's book about walking 400 miles on the rail?
I mean, that was like the ultimate trespassing.
Does anybody read that book? I forgot what it's called. Did you read the Sebastian Junger book? He kind of decided to walk 400 miles along a rail track from like this area up to.
We would not advise that.
What's that?
We would not advise.
No, there's
that,
like serious, serious issues
Very
where the
safety,
railway folks were constantly trying to get him off the tracks. It's sort of an interesting thing, but he's a big name, so I just wondered if that was something.
Unfortunately, that's like the leading cause of death.
I'd love to take a couple of questions in a moment, but we're going to have Senator Deb Fischer and Congressman Bruce Westerman up here in a bit. What do you most need Congress to think about in this space of modernization? What do they need? I mean, if you're talking to them and we were having a dinner salon and saying, hey, we're sort of stuck in 1970s gridlock on some stuff, and we've got to get out of this gridlock. What would be the top 2 or 3 things you would tell this government that you really need to see?
So here's the 3 things that come to mind. One, I mentioned kind of pilot programs, proving grounds. You need robust legislation that allows for objective evaluation, data development, and determination as to whether a new way of doing things is better and how you can roll that into an existing regulatory requirement. 2, we really need to establish regulations. This is forward-looking, outcomes-based regulations. Tell me where you want to go and allow me to continually determine the best way to get there. And if I'm hitting or achieving the results you're requiring, we should all be happy with that outcome. And 3, I think we really need mode-neutral technology policy. In other words, every mode ought to be operating on the same playing field. We're about to have driverless trucks zipping around the interstates of Texas. We have Waymo dropping people off at the wrong gates at San Francisco Airport. And yet we who operate on a fixed guideway are really being hamstrung in our ability to automate. And when you look at the advantages and frankly the simplicity and the significant less interaction with the traveling public, we should absolutely be on the tip of the spear of where folks want to be deploying said technology. So it's a big lift, but I think there's a lot of folks who are interested in moving the ball forward, and it's something that all stakeholders ought to get behind.
I was in New York during the UN General Assembly when you've got every head of state in town, and traffic was a gridlock, and I just felt so sorry for those stuck Waymos. They were just
very confused.
There are little circles going on there. They were not moving, and there were people inside. I mean, I think it would have been worth it just to sort of have that experience. But I don't know what's happening inside of Waymo when you're stuck in gridlock for an hour. But let's take any question here. We got any thoughts, questions, reactions to Ian real quickly.
Everybody agrees with everything I said.
Well, then I'm going to pick someone. Who do I want to say? I'm going to go to this gentleman right here. You've got a comment.
This is Ken Fielding with Storm Center Communications. We're a geospatial mapping technology company. So when you refer to technology innovations, when it comes to safety, inspections, transportation, what innovations more than likely will complement what you're doing to make the railroads and the tracks more safer?
It's a great question.
Yeah, so a couple of different things. I think it's all kind of, we're moving as a world into the world of sensors and continuous monitoring, and so there's kind of a twofold advantage there. So one, you're constantly getting feedback on the health of the asset that's being monitored, and so you can get a much earlier detection of if there's a problem. 2, when it comes to GPS in particular and real-time monitoring of, for example, train location, et cetera, we're way behind on customer visibility. And so, you order a pizza, when they put the freaking pepperoni on it before it comes to your house. We've got a lot of room to grow there to better compete with other modes. There is really great technology out there for continuous monitoring of not only asset health, but asset location, et cetera. And so I think we're kind of at the tip of the spear when it comes to the opportunities out there.
It's a great question, but it makes me think about tracking things, tracking systems, blockchain being able to kind of diffuse this in a way where you've got a vast set of tools to begin monitoring things. I was just reading about your industry, and one dimension that's not often discussed is the extraordinary theft of cargo in your arena. How can that be today? I mean, and what's going on that front?
So I would just say across the entire supply chain, cargo theft is becoming a bigger and bigger issue because it is not petty crime. It is being coordinated by what are very sophisticated transnational criminal networks. And so that's at the warehouse, that's at the port, that's in the trucking industry, and that's at the rail industry. And what we're seeing across the supply chain is literally billions of dollars of goods stolen a year.
I mean, security is really high on this
Very
administration's radar screen. How can this be? What are you talking? What is the administration? What are the law enforcement crowd doing in this, and what tools do you need?
So a big piece of this has been a lack of federal engagement historically because it is seen or has been seen as more of a state or local issue, and state and local law enforcement just don't have the capacity or the wherewithal to really go after the head of the snake on this stuff. The feds do, and what we're talking about is interstate commerce, so there's a natural fit for the federal government. I will say that House, Senate, and the administration are very much more engaged. We've got bipartisan legislation in the House and Senate. The White House has gotten involved for really federal coordination, federal resources for enforcement. It's not, we arrest people all the time. They just don't get prosecuted. I had a railroad arrest somebody 17 times and they never got prosecuted. So unless there's actual penalties with real teeth, we're not going to be able to drive a wedge into this and start to bend the curve back down.
Well, thank you for this. Thanks, Ian, for helping us launch to understand what the state of play is. And I got to tell you, there's so many sectors, and I'm going to talk to our next panel in just a moment, where if you kind of look at the regulatory realities of industries. I've been looking at pharmaceuticals, for instance, one area where it was the in their case, it was 1930s. In your case, maybe you had a big jump in the 1970s. But it seems that we're behind in a lot of regulatory catch up in this area.
I think so.
Particularly as technologies come on. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You've got a great panel.
Let's give it
great
Ian
members.
Jefferies, President of the Association of American Railroads.
Great.
Thank you for my avocado toast, too.
Yes.
Thank you very much.